Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another session in Edgware United Synagogue's Adult Education Programme. Many of the past recorded sessions can be found on our Edgware US YouTube channel. The rather jokey title of tonight's talk is Grodzinski's on a Roll, the development of a successful bakery. My first contacts with Grodzinski's were in the 1970s and 1980s when I worked in central London. I spent many a happy lunch hour wandering around their shops in Soho and beyond, dining on a range of their delicious cakes and puddings. I suspect the present range on offer locally may have altered as tastes have changed, but their products are still very much in demand. You know you have made it in the real world when everyone recognises you by a diminutive form. Our London mayors were Ken and Boris, and our Edgware baker is now universally known simply as Grods. Tonight, we shall hear about the development of the bakery from its 19th century East End roots and follow through its domestic and overseas expansion by the following generations. Our speaker is the current owner, Jonathan Grodzinski, a fourth generation master baker, if I'm not mistaken. From time to time, he has made the headlines of the Jewish and local newspapers. In 2012, the Edgware and Mill Hill Times reported that he was delighted with the pasty tax U-turn, the hot takeaway food 20% VAT tax, by the then Chancellor George Osborne, who had to eat humble pie since the issue was too hot to handle. And last month, the JC wrote about his pop-up shop in Golders Green selling donuts for Hanukkah. Along with his bagels, it demonstrates that his business is committed to whole foods. In Edgware, we have watched how well Grods has managed to cope with the pandemic with meticulous social distancing, both within the shop, where 5 customers are allowed in at any one time to eliminate the chance of virus spreading, and outside, where waiting positions are clearly demarcated. At a time when even weddings and wedding cakes have ended up in tears, the management is an exemplar of good practice to others. During the present crisis, they have a temporary online delivery service for customers in isolation. A word of caution, I did hear of another online bakery which accidentally deleted all its cookies. At the end of his talk, Jonathan has kindly agreed to answer your questions and respond to your comments. Please then wave your virtual hand if you wish to speak or type something in the Zoom chat. So over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you. Corny introduction, but I appreciate it. Our story today is not just of 130 years history of Anglo Jewry's best known bakery, but it is also a story of love, of tragedies, perseverance and determination. Overall, it's a demonstration of how an occupation, a business, can get into the blood. Thank you for inviting my wife and I to tell you our family story. My name is Jonathan Grodzinski.
Donuts there and the French baguettes at the end, okay? Hello. How are you?
So what's going on tonight?
This is the end of the festival of Passover. It's an 8-day festival during which Orthodox Jewish people, in fact most of the Jewish people around, do not eat any bread, anything that's leavened, anything. So we're eating matzah instead. It's not wonderful for the digestion, and we are really, really missing our bread, our rolls, our croissants. And so the minute that the festival is out, we start working, and within a couple of hours, we have hundreds, if not thousands of people coming along to buy our what we call comments.
Next.
Okay, we'll move on to the next one. Okay.
I am the son of Harry, the son of Abi, the son of Harris, the son of Yitzchak, the son of Yankel, the son of Nahum, the son of Aaron, who was the son of Yosel. Yosel was born around 1700 in Voronovo, near Lida, in the Grodno region of now Belarus. To the best of our knowledge, all 8 generations were bakers. So you see, baking is in my blood. Next. Warszawski is the name of a person from Warsaw. Wileński would be someone from Vilna. Similarly, Grodzinski means a person from Grodno. When surnames were adopted in Napoleonic times, anyone with an association with Grodno might have been called Grodzinski. Grodzinski in northeast Poland is as common a name as Smith in the UK. Indeed, when my brother Michael, an Israeli policeman, Googled Michael Grodzinski policeman, he found another Michael Grodzinski, also a policeman. But this one was from Canada, Catholic, no relation. Voronovo, highlighted, was a small village, a shtetl. Lida was the nearest large town and was the home of another Jewish baking family, the Goids, a name that some of you may recognize, who intermarried with the Grodzinskis throughout the 19th century. More about them later. Next. Tsar Alexander II of Russia was assassinated in St. Petersburg in 1881. And guess who was blamed? Yes, the Jews, of course. The anti-Semitic rioting, pogroms to us, followed throughout the Pale of Settlement, which led to mass Jewish emigration. Hundreds of thousands of Jews left Russia for the USA, for Palestine, and in our case, for the UK. Judith and her children and her husband Aaron, otherwise known as Harris, came to these shores around 1888 with their children, Sarah and Abi, my grandfather. You'll see Judith in the next slide. My great-grandmother Judith, born Goyd, was one of 7 siblings. And as you will see from the next slide, each one of them was either a baker or married to a baker. Hirsch, the youngest, stayed in Europe and was murdered by the Nazis in Treblinka in 1942. The other 6 became English bakers. So, as you see, baking is in our blood. Next. Those refugees brought their trades with them. Great-grandmother Judith rented the bakehouse of an East London master baker, Barnett Gunovitz, seen here in his regalia. As he finished his night shift, she would come in to bake bilkelach, sweet knotted rolls, brushed with egg and sprinkled with poppy seed. And in the next shot, you will see Harris. His job was to go out into the market and sell the bilkelach from a basket. In the next shot, I found a picture of the market. And if you look carefully at this picture, you might just spot him or not. Their product was good and they prospered, although evidence seems to suggest that they were not exactly penniless immigrants. And within a few years, Harris and Judith had bought their own bakery at 31 Fieldgate Street off Commercial Road in the epicenter of the Jewish immigrant community. No, we don't. Judith, my great-grandmother, had a sister, Ganesha. In English, she called herself Jessie, much easier. Jessie Goyd. And in another Grodzinski-Goyd marriage, Jessie married Harris's nephew, Chaim Elia Grodzinski. They also came to this country to be London bakers. And in the next shot, you will see that Chaim Elia and Ganesha, we've gone one too far, please. Can we go back one shot? Thank you. Chaim Elia and Ganesha established their own bakery in Bedford Street in the East End. Bedford Street is now called Cavell Street. It seems that Harris and Chaim Elia were in a joint business called H. Grodzinski and Company. And in the next shot, which we just saw a preview of, we see an advert which appeared in London's only weekly Hebrew language newspaper, HaYehudi, in the 1890s and the early 1900s. The advert is interesting. In translation, it reads, "Warning from Harris Grodzinski, the baker who is praised and famed for his good challahs and cakes that excel in their wonderful taste, not the best in the city of London, who requests from everyone who knows him to beware of those who compete with him, not with the quality of their merchandise, but they deceive the customers by minting Grodzinski's seal on their merchandise so as to attract to themselves the customers. Therefore, whoever wants to acquire for his money good bread of fine flour free from any impurities should turn to me. Also, all my acquaintances know that my baking is the ultimate of kashrus. I separate challah according to the rules, and I do not bake my bread on Shabbos, God forbid. My shops are open to all seekers at 20 Bedford Street, 31 Fieldgate Street." Now, from this text, we learn that Harris is religious, he keeps Shabbat, he takes challah, and that from the fact that he is advertising in HaYehudi, he is a Zionist. Furthermore, we see that it was acceptable for Jewish bakers to self-satisfy that they were kosher. The Beth Din of those days supervised butchers, and they certified Pesach products, not much else. Let's move on to the next slide. And here you'll see that the image used in the advert, which had been taken by the famous photographer Mark Perkoff, was also used on an inedible label baked into every Grodzinski loaf for half a century, until early in World War II, a zealous officer from the Ministry of Food visited Schneider's yeshiva in Stamford Hill. He found a bocher there cutting away the label and the tiny amount of bread attached to it. War meant zero waste. And the official hot-footed it to Grodzinski's head office in Dunsmuir Road and ordered my father to stop labeling the bread. I've mentioned, and if we look in the next clip, Bedford Street and Fieldgate Street. The 1891 census shows my great-grandparents Harris and Judith at 31 Fieldgate Street and Chaim Elia and Ganesha at 20 Bedford Street. Here, the 1901 census shows the reverse. By 1911, the families had gone back to their original addresses. Why? The mystery was solved at our 1988 centenary, and in the next clip you'll see a picture of that, when Chaim Elia and Jesse's oldest son, Philip Hyams, then a sprightly 94-year-old, explained to me that his parents were better entrepreneurs than my great-grandparents, and that when Harris and Judith's business needed revitalizing, Chaim Elia agreed to swap bakeries with his uncle/brother-in-law Harris, and then moved back a few years later when the business was back on its feet. This wasn't just a matter of turning left rather than right as you drove to work. It involved moving your whole family, your home, as well as your business. And I think that that was true charity. In the next clip, we can see problem that Jewish bakers had with Shabbat. Shabbat was sacrosanct in the Grodzinski home and bakery, but British law made it almost impossible for Shabbat observant bakers to survive. It forbade all baking on Sundays, and that's from midnight on Saturday night. And it didn't allow shops to open after 1 p.m. on the Christian day of rest. Closing for Shabbat and Sunday for 2 days a week would have meant financial ruin. So Jewish bakers both campaigned to change the law and they flouted it. In 1897, Harris was spotted by a spy from the London Bakers Association, who was on the lookout for so-called unfair competition from Jewish bakers. Harris tried to persuade him not to prosecute. As this court report shows, he said to the spy who was going to report him to the authorities, "You don't want to take me to court. Why don't you come in for a glass of schnapps instead?" But to no avail. There was laughter in the court and a 10-shilling fine for each offence. In the next clip, the case moves forward to the Lord Chief Justice. 5 years later, he decided that the law was the law despite any hardships. And so the campaign moved to Parliament for a new Sunday trading law. As you see from the second newspaper clipping in the bottom left, Harris was no stranger to court. He was also prosecuted for using bad eggs. We won't go into that now, even though it's a cracking story. In the next clip, I want to talk to you about the pasty tax, which Spencer talked about in his introduction. In 2012, the budget had proposed a pasty tax, which would have added 20% VAT to the price of any food sold hot. It would have meant an extra 50 pence tax for a hot challah until it cooled down after it came out of the oven. My Edgware staff and I demonstrated against this at Boris's London mayoral hustings and got told off by the local Conservative party. And I lobbied local MPs and I joined thousands of others at a massive demo opposite Downing Street. I even got this mention in Hansard. Back to our history in the next clip. The JC in 1903, Harris makes his first expansion and takes over a Stoke Newington bakery. In 1904, the first tragedy struck the family. Harris died aged 48, Judith was a widow, and her children, Abby and Sarah, were teenage orphans. And in the next clip, we see that Chaim Elia stepped in to keep the business going. He arranged for Harris on his deathbed to transfer it. Go back one, please. Oh, okay, there's one in between, don't worry about it. He arranged for Harris to transfer his assets and avoid death duties. And he marshalled the baking in-laws, the Goyd family, the Wolanski family, the Friedman family, to set up a company to run the Fieldgate Street bakery until Abby was old enough to take over. Chaim Fink. Abby learned Gemara with the diamond merchant Chaim Fink. Chaim had a niece and suggested that Abby should meet her, sorry, thank you. Her name was Bertha Yeidel. She came from Funkstadt, near Frankfurt am Main in Germany. They fell in love and were married in 1908. And in the next slide, we see on the right their ketubah, and on the left, their wedding dinner menu. They set up home in Fieldgate Street. And in the next slide, we can see them outside their shop. Many of you will recognize this picture, which I now use on my carrier bag. Let's study the picture in the next clip. Look at the grating to the basement. Beneath this grating was the bakehouse. Typically for that time, located below ground, hot and cramped bakers would work 6 12-hour shifts a week, making massive doughs by hand, baking their bread in coal-fired ovens, which they kept going without a break. No air extraction, and their only holidays were the Jewish ones, 9 days at Pesach and a few other days dotted around the year. Moving on, we see the poster in the window of the shop. It says, notice, this baker's shop is a trade union shop. And for those who couldn't read English, in Hebrew characters, it says, this baker shop, a trade union shop. The trade unions wanted to force master bakers to employ only union labor. They did this by encouraging the public to only buy from union shops. And the semi-Yiddish English used in the poster was for the benefit of immigrants who could speak but not read English. You may have noticed, and we'll see in the next clip, that behind Bertha was Israel Kanarick, married to A.B.'s sister Sarah. He, and later his son Hilly, were flour factors. They sold flour to Grodzinski until the 1970s. And his son David Kanarick lives in Mill Hill, and some of you might know him. Finally, in the next clip, I've circled Russia Kayla Grodzinski. She's a great-grandmother, or she was a great-grandmother, of Lester Abrahams, who also lives in Edgware. My father is in the picture, but he can't be seen. He was born a month or two after the photo was taken, and so you can know where he is. A.B. was entrepreneurial. He was a partner in a soda water business. And in his will, we find that in 1917, he had opened a bakery at 107 Cornwall Road, Notting Hill, which you can see in the next slide. It was 9 kilometers from the East End. My great-great-grandmother, we will see in the next picture. My wife thinks she looks like a gargoyle. Bubba Devora. This was Judith's mother. My father told me that every Friday morning, after the bakers had finished work, Bubba Devora would bake her own batch of challahs. They were sold in the shop in Fieldgate Street at a premium price. And they were called Bubba Devora's challahs. She died in 1917. And for a number of years after, Bubba Devora's challahs continued to be sold at a premium until eventually it was realized that Bubba Devora was no longer making them. The truth will out eventually. A.B. and Bertha had 4 more children after my father. And as you will see in the next slide, they would take holidays in Westcliff, and during World War I, they had a home in Letchworth away from the Zeppelins. Everything was rosy. At the end of World War I, in the autumn of 1918, the second family tragedy struck. A.B. took to his bed after an evening walk on Letchworth Common with what he thought was a cold. Within a few days, on the Thursday night, he succumbed to Spanish flu and became one of the 228,000 people who died in this country in that pandemic. He was buried 3 days later on the Sunday, on his 10th wedding anniversary. At this point, I'm going to ask Rosie to come in and tell you an anecdote.
I am still, after almost 50 years of marriage, still a newcomer to the family. I wasn't born a Grodzinski. My job this evening is to deal with the more emotional side of the story. The story that I'm going to tell you now is very close to my heart, as you'll understand as it unfolds. There was a family called Jacobs who owned a Jewish delicatessen in Woolwich, southeast 18, on the other side of the river. Each week, a barrow boy would wheel a cart of Grodzinski products under the Blackwall Tunnel and out the other side to Woolwich to supply their shop. The barrow boy was more than just a delivery man. Yes, for sure, he delivered stuff, but he was an essential part of the social networking that went on between the north and the south sides of the river. He brought news. One Friday in October 1918, when asked how things were going on his side of the river, he told them very sadly that Mr. Grodzinski, at the age of only 32, had died of the Spanish flu, and he was to be buried on his 10th wedding anniversary on the Sunday. And he'd left a widow, Bertha, and 5 children under 9. As history would have it, the Jacobs family had just had a new baby. The baby had not even yet had a Brit. It was due to be on the Shabbat. The Jacobs were so saddened by the death of Avram Bezalel Grodzinski that on the following day at the Brit, they named their new baby also Avraham ben Yedidia. That baby, later known as Albert Rosenberg, was my father. Creepy. My father was named after Johnny's grandfather before either of us had ever been thought of.
Thank you, Rosie. Oh, just 1 second, I don't know if you can see. I thought I'd turn my computer off, I do apologise. In the next clip, we see 2 pictures. The original one of Bertha and Aby, and then after his death, just Bertha in the front of the shop. Family advice was that she should sell up. You can't do it again. You haven't got old enough children to take over in a few years' time. Give up, look after your family. But she was a strong woman of German Jewish stock. She sent her 2 oldest boys, my father Harry and my uncle Ruby, to her family in Germany, where they would get a good Jewish education. Granny Bertha, with the help of the Welsh lass called Florrie Thompson, looked after her other 3 children and single-handedly ran the business for the next 12 years. Other Jewish master bakers were in awe of her. I've come across minutes of a meeting of the London Jewish Master Bakers Protection Society. They were discussing bread prices. I'm not sure whether they wanted them to go up or down. In those days, both were possible. They came to a conclusion. They voted on it. It was unanimous. But the records say that one of them piped up and said, "It doesn't matter what we decide. Mrs. Grodzinski isn't here. And if she doesn't agree, it doesn't matter what we say." 10 strong businessmen in awe of my grandmother. My father was growing up, and in the next clip, we see 2 of his diary entries. I'll read them to you in case his writing is difficult. Tuesday, 28th of January. Sender has a fight with Charlie in the bakehouse. Result, Sender has a broken jawbone. Wednesday, 29th January. Have Senders round. Managed splendid. Let me explain. Sender Zobin was a delivery person. He would go round the East End delivering Grodzinski bread to Jewish grocery stores. He was out of action. On that Wednesday morning, my grandmother, Bertha, woke my father up pulled off his duvet or whatever they had in those days and said, Harry, you've got to go and do send us round. You've got to take the horse out. No, I can't go, he said, pulling the duvet over himself. It's far too cold. No, no, no. And anyhow, I don't know the way. Don't worry, she said. The horse will know the way. So the bakers loaded up the bread on the cart. My father got up, said, giddy up, or whatever you say to a horse, and clippity-clop, 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 the horse trotted out of Fieldgate Street into Commercial Road, down the road, into Valence Road, wherever it was, stopped outside a shop. My father jumps down into the shop and he says, hello, I'm Harry Grodzinski. I'm from the bakery. Sender's not well. What bread do you want today? He gets up back on the cart, giddy up, clippity-clop, clippity-clop, horse moves along, and so it continues. I shan't bore you with every single stop on the way, back into Fieldgate Street, job well done, which is exactly what my father meant, have senders round, manage splendid. I asked Rabbi Zobin of Ner Yisrael for a picture of his great-grandfather, Sender Zobin, but he couldn't find one. So, second best, in the next clip, I found a horse outside Grodzinski Bakery in Fieldgate Street, and I claim that that is Sender's horse. Does anybody there challenge that? In the next clip, I just want to show you how deliveries have progressed. Bottom left is a 1903 picture of Dunsmuir Road. And if you see in the bottom right of that picture, a baker's cart, similar to the one immediately above, which is being drawn. What would happen that the baker's man would fill up the cart with bread. He would walk round the local area, delivering from house to house. He'd go twice a day. Once early in the morning, delivering rolls for breakfast, and then later on, coming back and delivering bread and getting tomorrow's order. On the right, top right, is Wilson's van. If any of you know Nigel Wilson, that was his father. And that was probably one of our early vans in the 1940s. Whilst we're talking of history, in the next clip, we see some letters to the Jewish Chronicle about Cholent. What on earth has Cholent got to do with bakers? Some of you are shouting and waving your hands and saying, I know, but I can't see you, so I'll have to tell you. Not only in England, not only in Jewish bakeries, but in every bakery in those times, there was one day of rest, whether you were Christian or Jewish. And that day of rest, the bakers didn't bake, but their ovens had to be kept hot and they had to be kept going till the next day. So you had a wonderful source of heat. People at home didn't have large ovens, as we do today, for baking cholent or for keeping it hot. And so on Friday afternoons, they would bring their cholent in its pot to the baker. They would pay threepence, old money, and the baker would put a tag on with the name of the family, and it would go into his oven. The following morning, the cholent would be collected. If you were from, then you'd send the child round to collect it because there was no Eruv in the East End. But hot food was important. And there are still memories of this. This also happened in the non-Jewish community on a Sunday, where people would take their Sunday roast to the baker. He'd put it in his oven, go to church. And as long as the sermon wasn't too long, it would be perfectly cooked when they came out of church. We've mentioned Florrie Thompson, and you'll see her in the next clip at the back, helping look after the children. Rosie again would like to tell you a human interest story. Rosie.
I've given you the tragedy, and now it's time for the romance. Bertha Grodzinski, known to all as Granny, was widowed very young with 5 small children. She was forced to reckon with so much. She was reputed to be the only person to have the Harrods van delivered to the East End of London. She was a very strong lady, and against all sensible advice, as Johnny has told you, she insisted on taking on the business all by herself. She sent the 2 older boys back to Germany to be educated and entrusted the care of the 3 remaining to Florrie Thompson, a young lady from Wales. Now, Harry Cole, a barrow boy for Grodzinski at that time, immediately fell in love with her. And the 2 stepped out together as people did in those days. And in the fullness of time, he made his proposal, "Florrie, will you marry me?" To his utter amazement, she turned him down. When he pulled himself together, he asked her why. Her reply was simple: "I need to stay with Mrs. Grodzinski until her children are grown up. She needs me." And thus it was that they waited 10 years before they were married, but they did live happily ever after. We received an email in 2015 from Hazel Cole, who was the granddaughter of Harry Cole. I won't read you the whole thing, but I'll read you some little extracts. After Harry and Florrie married, they returned to Bedfordshire, where Grandad was a farmhand. Sometime, I would imagine 1932, the farm went bankrupt and my grandparents were faced with having to put their 2 young daughters into a workhouse and themselves into another one. But somehow, your family heard about this, and my father was offered the job as a roundsman at 91 Dunsmuir Road, and the family was able to stay together. Thank you. And later on, the final reason our family is always grateful to your family was that after the retirement of Grandad, he was ill and in hospital, and the doctors in Stevenage couldn't find out what was wrong. Your family found out that he was unwell and took him to see their family doctor, who discovered he had a type of cancer and ensured he received the best treatment. And my father always said that you gave him 10 more years of life to spend with his family. So, thank you. And lastly, on speaking to my brother, like me, he can remember the cakes and biscuits that would appear on Christmas Day from the Grodzinskis when we had our family party on Boxing Day. He also has wonderful memories of Grandad taking him round the bakery factory. The family affected the lives of so many people.
Harry worked for Grodzinski for well on 40 years, and in his retirement, we met up with him twice a year. Once on Boxing Day, when Uncle Ruby would go and take him mince pies and a Christmas cake, and then on Erev Pesach, when he would come down to London in order to buy our chametz. Expansion. As we'll see in the next clip, from my father's diaries again, we moved out of the East End, or in fact, we expanded into Stamford Hill. My father was a great socialite. He wasn't married until over 30, and he would go to parties and he would meet people who had left the East End, and they'd say to him, "Harry Grodzinski, oh, we remember your bread. Oh, it was lovely. It was all in the past tense." He'd come home and said to his mother, "Mother, we have a brand." Well, he wouldn't have said a brand because that's modern thought. He would say, "We have to move. We have to follow people." And so in 1930, Bertha bought Mr. Hurstley's bakery in Dunsmuir Road. And in this picture, we can actually see Harry Cole pulling the barrow outside Dunsmuir Road, 91 Dunsmuir Road. It's still a Grodzinski shop. We can see in the next slide the basement bakery. This was a bit of a larger bakery, and that was in 1940s. Our next slide shows the pre-World War II expansion. Stamford Hill, Willesden, Hendon, Cricklewood. Grodzinski were following their customers to the London suburbs. They also established rounds in many of these places. Again, these were barrows. Deliveries were made from the central bakery to a garage. One of them was behind Frome Wines, or what was Frome Wines in Finchley Road and in other places. And then very early in the morning, the barrow boys would load up with their bread, go round, exactly as Harry Cole did in Stamford Hill. And that was in addition to the shops. 10 years of expansion, 5 new shops. Harry and Ruby were youthful Grodzinski entrepreneurs. In the next clip, we see a Art Deco 1930s paper bag. I think it's a classic. World War II halted the expansion. And in the next clip, we can see pictures of my father and my uncle at work, and my uncle with all his manageresses on the bottom left at the wedding of Monica. World War II, as I said, halted expansion and labour shortages stopped the rounds. On the 29th of December 1940, German bombers blitzed 31 Fieldgate Street. No one was there at the time, and baking moved in its entirety to Dunsmuir Road. My father decided that it was time to again follow the customers, those who'd been evacuated out of London. And again in his diaries, he records that the 410 from Finsbury Park was halted for 20 minutes whilst Grodzinski loaded up its goods on a Thursday afternoon to go out to Letchworth, to Hatfield, and places that the Jews had moved out to. A change during the war in 1942. In the next clip, we see an advert, an unusual occurrence for Kadassia to be advertising in the Jewish Chronicle, but they did in those days. Grodzinski took on rabbinical supervision. Rabbi Schonfeld persuaded my father that it was a good idea, and self-certification of being kosher had officially ended. Post-war, we will see in the next clip, massive expansion. Excuse me a moment. Hampstead Garden Suburb in 1945, Golders Green in 1947, and most important to the audience here, if you'll see in the top middle picture, 88 Edgware Way, which opened on Monday the 31st of May 1948. And whilst on the subject of Edgware, a Grodzinski counter was opened within Flax's Delicatessen at 17 Edgware Lane in 1958. And in the 1980s, our existing shop over the road in Edgware Lane was opened. My father and my uncle not only went into retail, but as you'll see from the next clip, which are pictures of Marks and Spencer in St Albans in 1947, they had a short foray into that great emporium. It didn't last terribly long. In March 1947, we phoned them up to say there'll be a short break. We won't be able to produce and supply you for a week. It's going to be Pesach. The reply was, thank you very much. We'll manage, we'll go away from you. And that was it, but Pesach was Pesach. Talking about Pesach, we, before the war, produced for Pesach. And after the war, until 1954, there was food rationing. But then, in the next clip, you will see that there were two major changes in 1954 as a result of the end of food rationing. Once again, we could make Pesach cakes and biscuits. And we're talking about quality stuff, not the sort of stuff you get nowadays. That's not nice. Also, fresh cream was available. My father and my uncle opened a patisserie in St. John's Wood, staffed by Swiss patissiers who wanted to learn English and would come with their skills to London for a year or two. 15 golden years followed, and we'll see another batch of shops opening. By the 60s, we had 24 shops. We were using 20 tons of flour a week. At Pesach time, our production, on the next clip, please, we were producing 16 tons of cakes and biscuits. We had 200 employees. In the mid-1960s, the fourth generation entered the business. In 1966, my cousin Emmanuel, an accountant. 2 years later, my brother David, a London. In 1969, myself, after 2 years at yeshiva. And a decade later, Daniel, an accountant, and Monica, who until then had been a dressmaker. Profits were ploughed back into the business. And in 1969, all the small bakeries were combined at a 25,000 square foot location in Everbury Road, South Tottenham, from where 4 vans made twice daily deliveries throughout London. Older watchers of this will see in the next clip a bag that they may remember. The 24 shops listed on the back of the paper bag. The 1960s and 1970s saw 2 innovations. Our West End branches started selling filled rolls before it was fashionable. Hood Street, Great Titchfield Street, Broadwick Street, and later Leather Lane in Holborn and Bishopsgate developed a lunchtime trade feeding hungry workers who no longer wanted to bring packed lunches from home. And in the next clip, we can see that there was another change, grocery. The spare wall opposite the traditional counter in the bakery shop cried out to be used. And just as Israeli goods were reaching UK, we started selling them. In retrospect, I don't think this was a good move. We were bakers, and you can't be all things to all people. I think we lost our way, and it left us open to attack. That attack came in the late 1980s by Israeli bakers. One after another, they came to England to bring something new to London's Jewish community. They baked on the premises, giving them the perception of greater freshness over our factory-baked, centrally baked bread and cake. Ours might have been fresher, you never knew, but it wasn't baked on the premises. First, it was Shalom Bakery in Ilford, the Nissim family's Sharon Bakery in Stamford Hill, then Moti Carmeli in Golders Green, and Avi Avital in Hendon Bagel Bakery. We tried to fight back, installing hot bread shops in Golders Green and Stamford Hill, but as you will see from the next slide, it was too late. The Israelis had hit hard at our customer base, and because of the investment in our central bakery premises and the potential cost of redundancy, we had no choice but to go into receivership. You'll see that this is headed financial rearrangement. That was on the advice of my then accountant and my very good friend, Michael Stolfer. In April 1991, my cousins and I bought a number of shops from the liquidator. Daniel and Monica bought 4 shops, including Golders Green and Edgware, and they worked together. J. Grodzinski and Daughters, so called because Rosie and I only have daughters, and we're very proud of that fact, was formed in North London. Each business baked from their own hot bread shops. This arrangement worked well, and businesses began to thrive again. In 1997, Daniel emigrated to his wife's birthplace, Toronto. We would talk from time to time. He phoned me up one day and said, Johnny, I want you to give me an opinion on a shop I've been to see. I'm thinking of buying. I said to him, Daniel, what sort of a shop is it? Very quietly, he said, it's a baker's shop. I said, Daniel, you told me that you were getting away from that. You never wanted to go back into bakery. It was, I know, he said, but it's in the blood. And you can see in the next slide, his 2 shops in Toronto, very impressive. And something to worth visiting when you're in Canada. At that point, when he left, I bought Edgware from them, from Monica and Daniel, and Monica continued for 7 years in Golders Green alone. In 2007, I started a modernization program. Excuse me one moment. Prior to that, I should mention that in 2004, when Monica retired, she sold Golders Green, Grodzinski, out of the family until its recent closure. More about that later. I started to take on managers who I found took responsibility and wanted to grow the business. I tried to give them as much leeway as possible. Volvi Kupferstein in Stamford Hill, star of The Apprentice we will see later, and Gemma, who many of you know in Edgware. We have 3 shops we needed to modernise. I rebuilt and refitted Dunsmuir Road in 2007, and then did the same in Clapton Common, Stamford Hill. In 2010, I bought the neighbouring shop in Edgware, and you will see this in the next clip, from the Chinese takeaway in Edgware Lane. Modernisation included a coffee shop, air conditioning, automatic doors, and bright lighting. My father-in-law at the time asked me how much I'd spent. And when I told him, and he picked himself up off the floor, and we picked him up because it was rather elderly at the time, he said, are you going to make a profit out of that? Are you going to see a return for your money? I said, I honestly don't know, but I know that if I don't do it, somebody else will come and open a bright shop, a light shop, air conditioning, automatic doors, room for buggies and double buggies. And they'll take all my business away. And from that, I learnt that one has to keep updating. And that we did again in Stamford Hill in 2016. I bought the neighbouring property, and for those of you who come from Stamford Hill, you might remember it as the Stip, a gambling machine shop. And in the next slide, you will see on the top left, our original Grodzinski shop with the Stip on the right next to it, and then pictures of a double shop, a massive double shop. In the next slide, if we could play the little clip, we appeared and starred in The Apprentice.
For 70-year-old Lord Sugar, 70 rubella. How much do you usually sell your arugula for?
£35 a piece.
We're actually looking for about 70. Because we're going at such a high volume, would we be able to do it at around 25 pence?
Probably the lowest we probably would go is 27.
About 26.
Fine.
There's only one other thing that we needed, just a birthday cake.
We've got a Dutch pound, which is a £6.
Do you be able to write happy birthday 70th, do the whole lot with the cake for £22?
23 is fine.
That's fine then. I think Joanna went in there and beat around the bush a little bit, and I thought, let's go step in, and I feel like I've done really well there actually.
Birthday cake and arugula bought.
You don't have to have a Tottenham Hotspur scarf around, do you?
Maybe. I'm a Tottenham fan.
James tries for the treble.
We really need a Tottenham Hotspur scarf.
My one, I don't know where it is.
Really?
Maybe at home.
Okay, no problem.
Thanks very much for that.
Thank you.
Just over a year ago, I sold the 2 Stamford Hill shops and bakery. The buyers insisted on keeping the name Grodzinski, and thus was born our new brand, Grods. Tonight, I'm happy to announce Grods of Edgware has bought the old Grodzinski Golders Green premises, and following extensive rebuilding and refitting, that should, please God, open its doors in late spring this year. Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached the end of our story for the moment. I am proud to be carrying on from generations of Grodzinskis, from Yossel in the 1700s, from his son Aaron, from his son Nachum, from his son Yankel, from his son Yitzchak, from his son Aaron Harris, and from his son Abi, and from his sons, my father Harry and my uncle Ruby. My ancestors knew nothing about websites, about electronic data capturing, about HACCPs, nor even of air conditioning. They hadn't heard of sushi or falafel, but they did excel at attention to customer needs and at making a high quality product. They were charitable, and they always tried to be appreciative of their staff. And in all those ways, I tried to emulate them. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. So Spencer, you should be unmuted as well now. I'll just stop the sharing.
Well, thank you for that interesting journey through the generations. I'm sure it stimulated many questions. I'm sure it's made us all hungry, but unfortunately, you're not in a position to give us any free samples tonight. Right, so who would like to kick off with a question? Anyone? Right, John Fox. Could you unmute yourself?
I'll need to just do it.
Right.
1 second. So if you could try and put up your hand, that would be a lot easier because I'll be able to find you more quickly. But bear with me. Okay, I found you. There we go, John. You should be able to talk now.
Not yes.
Oh yes, Mr. Grodzinski. What relation are you to Sam Grodzinski, if any?
The famous QC.
Yes.
He is my cousin Emmanuel's son. He did the
right. So the Grodzinskis have branched out into a different world now.
Indeed they have.
You're going to tell me in a minute he's going to be master of the rolls.
Oh my gosh. That was corny.
That was Avril, my wife, who made that terrible joke. I take it back. No, I've had the pleasure of being in a case with him. He's the most charming, lovely man. He's a cousin of yours, is he?
Yeah.
Indeed.
I think the connection between bakers and lawyers is that they're both judicial. And we have do we have a comment? Let me see.
So we've got two people with their hands up otherwise as well.
Okay, go ahead. And,
okay, so I'll bring in Margaret Rossum next. Margaret, you can unmute yourself. There we go.
Johnny, it was a pleasure to listen to you tonight. I don't know whether you saw me smiling all the time. I remember so well the shopping marketplace. I remember your father, Ruby. Your father was Harry, I remember him coming in. I remember Ruby coming in. I remember our Schneckli, our butter cake. I hope that's coming back to go to screen really soon, because that's what made our Shabbos. And the Schneckli too. I think that still exists. The reason that the shop has endured is because the Grodzinskis are a wonderful, upright, fair, warm, loving family. All the qualities that you look for in a business that's going to run. I hope you have great success and go to screen, close all the other bakeries. Grodzinski lives forever.
God forbid.
Thank
God
you.
forbid. God forbid. Everybody needs to make a living, Margaret.
It's true. It's true. It's true. But Hamei Vinyovin, he who knows where to go to buy their challah. Well, I make my challah, but buy everything else. Thank you.
Thank
I
you,
look
Margaret.
forward. I'm so excited.
I'll pay you later, Margaret.
And Johnny, I must tell you that the donuts that you sold in Golders Green over Hanukkah were the best.
We have a question here from Barbara and Andrew Sherling. Do you use the same recipes in each location? So in Toronto, will the bread taste the same as here?
Very, very good question. Forget about Toronto. When I had Stamford Hill and Edgware, even if I used the same recipe, I had to bake things differently. Stamford Hill wants their challahs, what Edgware would call burnt, and Edgware wants them soft, and just the opposite. You have to follow, you have to use your ears and listen to what your customers want. When Daniel went to Toronto, he took the recipes there, but he found that even the water was different and he had to adapt things. You have to adapt to what your customers want and follow that, and not be didactic and say, you will eat what I want. As Henry Ford said, my customers can have any color car they want as long as it's black. Had he carried on like that, Ford would have been out of business.
Right, we have a question here sent in by Leon Mallons. What I would like to know is, our challahs are baked today the same way as they were when I used to run errands to the Grodzinski shop in Dunsmore Road, clutching my pennies wrapped up in some paper. You can work out how long ago that was. The reason I ask is that what we do now is give the challahs another 10 minutes in the oven to crisp them up. I'm pleased to say that we do not have to do this, as the rye loaves, which are as excellent as they have always been, and by the by, what has happened to black bread, which I believe originated in Poland or Russia, an excellent loaf with a good taste.
A lot of questions there. I've already mentioned that there are different areas have different tastes. I do listen to what people want, but if people generally say to me they want softer challahs, then the people who want the crustier challahs will have to bake them a little bit longer. Tastes do change. When I started work in 1969, half the bread that we made was rye bread and half of it was white bread. Rye bread is declining quite rapidly. In Stamford Hill, they virtually don't sell it, 4 or 5 loaves a day. If I don't make Plaver anymore, nobody buys it. Sorry, Margaret, butter cake is also something that's gone by the by. We'd try bringing these things back from time to time, but there's no point fighting against trends. If people don't want them, there's no point me pushing them down people's throat. Black bread we make twice a week on Fridays and Sundays, and it's just still there. How long? As long as people want it. When they don't want it anymore, I'll stop making it.
Fine. Phil, you can unmute somebody else.
Yeah, I've got a question from Fluette. So Fluette, I'll just unmute you.
Right, go ahead,
yeah, you should be able to unmute now, Fluette. Here we go.
Right, am I on mute now? Yes?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you. Yeah.
Hi, Johnny. That was fascinating. Thank you very much for taking the time to tell us. An amazing history, and may you go on for many, many years. I just want to tell you an interesting story that when my son became engaged to a young girl from Toronto, I went to Toronto for 24 hours. That's it, 24 hours to meet the Maratonin. And they took me out to lunch. And on the way, they said, well, we'll pick up a cake for the evening because they were making a l'chaim in the evening. And where did they take me? To Daniel. And it was wonderful because I missed him in London. Monica and Daniel were a team and they were absolutely fantastic, replaced by a Gemma that I absolutely adore. And what I want to ask you is, you must look after your staff very, very well, because they're always there. The same ones have been there for so many years. How do you do it?
Long service is not unusual in our company. When I joined, 40 years was not unusual. It's a bit less the case nowadays. But 20 years, 15.
Yeah.
I don't know how I do it. I smile.
You smile.
I try to be appreciative of staff.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
Yeah. I worked for you one Friday morning. You didn't know that, but I worked for you one Friday morning. Came into Edgware's shop here on the parade, pick up my challahs as usual, and poor little Minnie. Do you remember Minnie?
Yes.
Yeah, she was there all on her own. Nobody was there at all. And she was having a terrible time. Friday morning, within very, very few minutes, you had sent somebody over. But I went to the other side, said, come on, Minnie, we'll do it together. And I sold.
You're going back 35 years.
Precisely.
The rate then was about 3 and 6pence. How many hours did you work?
About an hour and a half. And don't worry, put it in the Sudoku box. So I was even
5 and 3pence. No problem.
5 and 3pence. So I was even an employer of yours, but so you don't only keep your customers, you don't only keep your staff a long time, but you also keep your customers a long time.
Thank you very much.
We've had a lot of nostalgic comments here, commenting on the quality of all the products that you've had over a long period. Phil, any other people?
Angela's putting up her hand so many times.
Okay.
The problem is, I can't see because there's 147 pictures to look at.
Angela's iPad.
Okay, thank you, Johnny. I'm just going.
Can I unmute her?
I've done it. We're done. Yeah.
Right,
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Different.
Hi, Johnny. Hi.
Hello, Angela.
Hi. It was wonderful. It was very nostalgic. My mum would have loved it. She really would. It was just wonderful seeing the family. And I have to tell you, when I was 11, my parents bought me a bike with a basket on the front so that every Sunday morning I could ride down to Grodzinski and buy the rye bread and the rolls, then go to Mr. Myers and pick up the smoked salmon. And that was my Sunday morning, especially to go to Grods. Just wonderful memories, always.
The truth is I've got lovely customers as well. And the previous question about why do my staff stay so long, it's because they're appreciated by the customers. So
yep.
you've got
absolutely. What you give, you get back. Always. Yes. It was wonderful.
Sandra Eisen, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I will do. Okay, Sandra, you can unmute yourself.
Right, go ahead.
One of the things I love about Grodzinski's now is your Purim every year. It's one of my highlights. I have to come along every year to Grodzinski's in Edgware to see what costumes you're wearing and what dancing and what music is on. And I think it's a fantastic atmosphere you create there.
If I can just deny any responsibility for it, sometime in the winter, Gemma, manageress and now director of the company, decides what the theme is going to be. And for those of you who are not in Edgware, not only do we dress up, but the whole shop is dressed up with the theme. And if it's Old MacDonald and his farm, then we may be farm hands and the shop is kitted out as a farm and the music is going and we have a great time.
Yeah, I love it. Yes, thank you.
Right.
So there's a couple of comments on YouTube. I'll just read them out. So Adrienne Clark, she said, thoroughly enjoyed meeting Rhonda and Daniel in Toronto. I remember teaching the Grod children in the independent and minority schools. So some links there. And then Marcin Kuliga, I think that is. Mr. Johnny, it was a pleasure listening. Such a big piece of history. I'm feeling proud to be a part of your company. Thanking you for everything you've done for me and wishing you all the best.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Before we
Not
wrap
that I
up?
can see. If anyone has got any final questions, I want to put the virtual hand up. Now's the time.
Take one or two questions now. Okay, well, if you want to see this evening's session again, you'll find it on our dedicated Edgeware US YouTube channel. And please remember to hit the like button and share it with others. It will also be available on US TV. It's possible that we'll have an adult education session which hasn't been announced yet on Monday the 25th of January on COVID, but on COVID-19 with 2 eminent people in the profession, but we'll send out details if it's confirmed. Then on Tuesday the 2nd of February, Rabbi Jeffrey Schistler will be talking about Edgeware United Synagogue's 5 cantors in the 20th century and playing some of their Chazanut recordings as part of our 90th anniversary celebrations. It remains for me to thank Jonathan for his illustrated talk this evening and giving us an insight into the workings of his family business. It was most enjoyable and informative. I think that given the pleasure it's given to so many people, he might have to think about expanding to the number of shops he had at the peak in the past. But we shall see. So thank you very much for the session tonight. We doubled the capacity of our Zoom room, which filled, and there were many people on YouTube. I estimate that if we had 2 people on each of them, we probably had about 400 people tonight. So it really was tremendous. And can we unmute people and give our appreciation the usual way?
Yeah, so I'm just going to
before you do, sure. The person you've missed out is Phil Singer. Phil calmed me down. Everything wasn't a problem, and it was smooth. Don't worry. He's fantastic at it, and don't ever lose him.
No, we won't. We prefer him to be the facilitator than work in a bakery.
Yeah, that's for sure. Many thanks, Johnny, and it was a really interesting evening. Very interesting.
Can we thank your wife also for her 2 stories, her anecdotes? All I would say, all I might say is that you might remember the St. Brilliance film where Joyce Grenfell played Ruby Gates. She was engaged for more than 10 years before she tried getting her man. Right, can we?
So anyone that wants to unmute, your line is now. You can unmute yourself. So if you'd like to unmute, you can do. I'm going to stop the live stream
can we
now.
Just give a round of applause? But
Thank you.
Thank you.
All done.
Thank you very much.
Nice.
Thank
you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Johnny.
Sean.
Rosie, it was great. Rosie, it's a great story about your dad.